Sit by the fire. Close your eyes if you wish, because the story you are about to hear is not about heroes or gods, but about people. Real people who loved, worked, made mistakes, and dreamed. A story not written in books, but carved in stone, ash, and silence. Pompeii, a city frozen in time. Perhaps you know it from the images, grey ruins, plaster casts of bodies, empty streets. But it was not always so. Before the disaster, Pompeii was a place full of life. People laughed, argued, shared bread, wine, and gossip. It was as alive as any place you have ever been. And today, we will see it through different eyes, not those of a tourist nor of an archaeologist, but through the eyes of someone who truly knew it, who walked its streets when they still pulsed with life, who loved it and who lost it. Lucius Valerius Strabo was 25 years old when he returned home. He was a Roman legionary who had spent 5 years on the northern frontier among snow, mud, and war. He had fought against tribes no one remembers now. He had seen friends die. He had learned to obey, to endure, to stop thinking too much. But now his march ended where it had all begun, Pompeii. The road descending from Naples was full of noise and movement. Creaking carts, vendors selling dried fruit, slaves carrying heavy loads, and soldiers like him, newly discharged, returning to a home that might no longer be theirs. Lucius walked slowly, savouring the warm air of Campania. The sun shone on the back of his neck, nothing like the fog and ice of the north. His armour, somewhat worn, still gleamed with a certain pride. His face bore the marks of time, a scar crossing his left eyebrow, tired but steady eyes. He was no longer the impulsive youth who had left. Now he returned as a man, though he did not know if he still had a place to call home.
In the distance, he saw it, the mountain, Vesuvio, tall, serene, crowning the landscape like a sleeping god. No one in Pompeii feared it. It was simply part of the backdrop, a silent giant that bothered no one. And beneath its shadow, the city. Pompeii rose among vineyards, olive groves, and dusty roads. From afar, its walls looked intact. Its rooftops shone in the sun. It was as if time had not passed at all. When he crossed the Herculaneum gate, his senses were flooded at once. The smell of garum, the fermented fish sauce the Pompeians adored, the scent of warm bread, the shouts of vendors, the clinking of denarii, the echo of a street flute, all mingled into that chaos that only makes sense to those who have lived it. For others, it might have been overwhelming. For Lucius, it was the perfume of his childhood. He moved through the crowd, recognizing details, the mosaics on the ground, the paintings on the walls, the constant flow of water from fountains. Every corner brought back a memory. Here he had played with his younger brother. Here he had stolen figs with friends. Here he had seen her for the first time, Valeria. But it was not yet the moment to think of her. He walked to the Forum, then down narrow streets until he reached his home, a modest but respectable domus, owned by his father, Cassius, a merchant of olive oil. At the door, he lifted his hand and knocked 3 times on the old wooden plank. A thin woman with grey hair tied in a bun opened the door. Aurelia, his mother. For a moment, neither spoke. They simply looked at each other. And it was as if all the unsent letters of the past 5 years condensed in a single glance. "Lucius?" she whispered. He nodded, smiled faintly. The embrace that followed was silent and long, one of those that are not hurried and cannot be explained in words. Her arms were bony, dusted with flour. She smelled of fresh bread, of home. Soon after came his father, Cassius, more stooped than before, but with the same calculating eyes. He looked him up and down, his expression restrained. Then he said, "You have returned a man." Lucius lowered his gaze with a slight smile. "Rome has forged you like a fine blade. Come in. There is fresh wine and many stories to tell." The atrium received him with its cool air. The impluvium in the center reflected a cloudless sky. The sound of falling water seemed like an ancient, familiar song. He walked across the worn mosaics. Everything was where he remembered it, and yet different. Over dinner, they spoke little, not from coldness, but from respect for time. They shared glances, small smiles, silences full of meaning. Sometimes, a reunion needs more pauses than words. That night, Lucius went out to the peristyle, the inner garden. The sky was full of stars. The scent of jasmine floated in the air. He sat by the fountain and closed his eyes. For a moment, he felt peace. But deep in his chest, a quiet unease pulsed. Like a distant drum, the sense that something important awaited him. Pompeii was alive, but not for much longer. The next morning, Pompeii awoke slowly, like a city that knows the heat will soon embrace it. From the garden, Lucius heard the murmur of the fountain and the soft steps of his mother preparing breakfast. It was a scene he had imagined countless times during the cold nights in Germania. And now, at last, it was real. They sat together at the triclinium table. There was fresh bread, black olives, hard cheese, and a little honey. The wine was light, mixed with water, as was custom. The silence at the table was not uncomfortable. It was calm, as if they all knew the important words would come on their own. The first to break it was Cassius. "The business has grown," he said, without looking up from his plate. "We export more oil than ever. Rome pays well, and now there's a new port further south. I'm thinking of buying another press." Lucius nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He noticed the details, the deeper crack in the dining room wall, the new lines on his mother's hands, the way his father spoke with less firmness, more weariness. Time had passed. For everyone. "The city has changed," Aurelia added, as if reading his thoughts. "New names on the council, new rich men, not all with good reputations." "Marcus Nonius," Cassius said with a bitter expression. "An upstart, arrived with fresh money and bought half the hill, says he's building the largest villa in the region, as if that means anything." Lucius looked up. The name sounded familiar, but he didn't know why. "Nonius?" he asked. "A freedman," his father explained. "Grandson of a slave, but with enough gold even the gods greet you. He bought land, bought influence, and of course, bought himself a lavishly beautiful wife. You know how it works." A shiver ran through Lucius. A bad intuition, like a door left ajar in his memory. There was something his father wasn't saying, something his mother avoided, eyes fixed on her bread. He asked then, not as a statement, almost as a whisper. "And Valeria?" Silence fell like a stone into water. Aurelia set down her knife. Cassius sighed deeply and lowered his eyes. "Valeria married, son, 2 years ago, to Marcus Nonius." The world did not stop. The air did not cease to move. The sun still entered through the courtyard. But inside Lucius, something went out. Something small, but essential. Like a candle burning in an empty room. Valeria, the baker's daughter. His childhood friend. His first love. The only one who had waited for him at the fountain of Isis before he left. The one to whom he had promised he would return. Her, married. To the name he now knew why he disliked. No one spoke for a while. "No one blamed you for not writing," Aurelia said softly, trying to ease the weight. "The war, we all understood." Lucius nodded, but could not help thinking of the promise, of the old olive tree where he swore to return, of the letter he perhaps never wrote, of the time he thought he had. "It's fine," was all he said. But it wasn't.
The following days were torture for Lucius. He tried to drown himself in the rhythm of the city, but every corner whispered her name. The market where they had laughed while stealing figs, the fountain where they had met in secret, the small temple of Isis where she had prayed for his safe return, all of it was poisoned now by the thought of Marcus Nonius. One afternoon he decided to visit the baths to clear his mind. Steam hung thick in the air, carrying the low murmur of conversations. "I tell you, Nonius paid twice the value," a merchant said. "The man swims in denarii, but not a drop of noble blood in him. His grandfather was a freed slave." "Money is the new nobility, my friend," replied a magistrate. With it, he bought himself a seat on the council and the baker's daughter. They say she's the most beautiful woman in Pompeii. Lucius clenched his fists under the water. He left the baths and wandered aimlessly, his sandals striking the basalt stones in sharp rhythm. Without realizing, his steps carried him to the Via dell'Abbondanza, the city's main street, and there he saw her. Valeria was leaving a fine fabric shop, trailed by 2 slaves. She wore a stola dyed deep purple, the kind only the wealthy could afford, and gold jewelry on her wrists and neck. Her face, so vivid in his memories, looked paler now, thinner. Her eyes, once bright with mischief, held a shadow of melancholy. Their eyes met. For a single moment, the years vanished. Promises, dreams, and futures they'd never live passed between them in silence. She opened her mouth to speak, but one of her slaves whispered in her ear. With one last look of sorrow, she turned away and disappeared into the crowd. That night, Lucius couldn't sleep. The city, once vibrant, now felt like a gilded cage. He climbed to the roof of his domus. The air was strangely heavy, with a faint sulphur scent drifting in the breeze. He looked at Vesuvio. The mountain had always been there, a silent guardian. But under the moonlight, it seemed different, threatening, as if it were holding its breath. The morning of August 24th dawned unnaturally still. The wells and fountains that had been drying for days were suddenly full again. Birds, absent for weeks, returned to sing. People took it as a blessing. "You see," Cassius said cheerfully over breakfast, "I told you it was nothing. The earth settles, life goes on, and today is the festival of Vulcan, god of fire. We will honor him, and he will grant us a prosperous year." The city buzzed with preparations. Garlands hung from doors, small sacrifices were prepared, musicians tuned their instruments. The air was thick with incense and roasting meat. But Lucius felt only unease. He walked towards the amphitheater where the games would be held, passing a group of priests from Jupiter's temple performing a ritual. Their leader, an old man named Celsinus, watched the mountain with deep concern, his lips moving in a silent prayer. "Is there a bad omen?" Lucius asked, without turning his eyes from the peak. "The animals for sacrifice were restless this morning, and the smoke rising from Vesuvio is not the usual kind. The gods are warning us, but people only think of wine and games. They pray to Vulcan without realizing they sleep at his feet." The priest's words left a cold knot in Lucius's stomach. He looked at the crowd, laughing, buying, loving, living, unaware that the shadow above them came not from clouds, but from the earth itself. It was 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Lucius was in the forum when it happened. A deep, low rumble like a hidden storm rolled through the ground. It was not like the tremors they were used to. This one was violent, the earth heaving like fabric shaken by unseen hands. People screamed. The columns of Apollo's temple swayed. Then every head turned toward the mountain. The summit was gone, replaced by a column of black ash, pumice, and smoke shooting into the sky with unimaginable force. It rose miles high, blotting out the sun, then spread wide, forming a monstrous cloud shaped like a pine tree, only this one was of death. Panic consumed the city. The orderly crowd became a tide of terror, running in every direction. Lucius, trained for battle, felt the rush of adrenaline. He thought only of his family. He ran home, shoving through the human flood. "Mother! Father!" He found them in the atrium, frozen in terror as small pumice stones began to fall from the darkened sky. "No time! The mountain! It's erupting! We have to leave, now! To the port!" They covered their heads with cushions and tunics, heading into the streets. Day had turned to night, lit by lightning born inside the ash cloud. The rain of pumice grew heavier, piling in the streets. Roofs began to collapse. In the chaos, one thought struck Lucius like lightning: Valeria. He knew where she lived. Love turned to ash in his heart, yet the instinct to protect her was stronger than resentment. "Run to the port," he shouted to his parents. "Don't stop for anything. I'll meet you there." "Lucius, no!" Aurelia cried, but he was already gone. He reached Marcus Nonius's villa. Slaves ran wild, stealing what they could. He found Valeria in the peristyle, her face grey with ash. Her husband was nowhere to be seen. "He left me," she sobbed. "Marcus fled with his guards." He took her hand. "I won't leave you. Come." They ran. The pumice now reached their knees. The air burned their lungs. Buildings crumbled. Lucius shielded her from falling debris, guiding her through streets only a native could navigate. The port came into view. Chaos, screams, ropes snapping, ships capsizing as the sea first withdrew unnaturally, then surged back in a massive wave. A tsunami born from the mountain's collapse smashed the shore. No escape by sea. "Here, quickly!" Lucius pulled her toward the Fornici, stone arches near the beach where boats were stored. Dozens had taken shelter there,
coughing, crying, praying. He held her close. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "There's nothing to forgive," he said. And then it came. A pyroclastic surge, an avalanche of gas, ash, and rock hotter than any forge roared down the slope at hurricane speed. It was not smoke, but a solid wall of death, incinerating everything in its path. Lucius closed his eyes, wrapping himself around Valeria. He felt the heat before the pain, and in that instant his only thought was, "I promised I'd come back, and here I am." Then only silence.
After the roar came stillness. Pompeii lay buried beneath ash and darkness. In a matter of hours, a city full of laughter, love, and life had vanished. The giant had breathed out, and the world had changed forever. Centuries passed, empires rose and fell, names were forgotten, languages lost, and yet beneath the ground Pompeii slept in silence. Until 1748, workers digging near Naples uncovered walls, mosaics, and something far more haunting, bodies, or rather the empty spaces where bodies once lay, hollow voids in the hardened ash left by flesh long decayed. Archaeologists filled them with plaster, and in doing so gave form again to the final moments of Pompeii. A mother clutching her child, a chained slave, a dog twisted mid-struggle, and beneath an arch by the ancient port, two figures. A man shielding a woman, her face pressed against his chest, his arm forever wrapped around her. They had no names, yet some called them Lucius and Valeria, not because history proved it, but because the heart needed it. Perhaps they were strangers, perhaps they never loved each other in life, but in death they became a story of love, of protection, of choosing another's safety over your own. Pompeii is not only ruins, it is a mirror, showing us how fragile life is and how deeply human moments can outlast centuries. Lucius, in our telling, was no hero. He was a man who returned to a home that no longer welcomed him. But on his last day, he chose to run toward the love he had lost, not to claim it, but to protect it. And in that choice, he became eternal, not because of how he died, but because of how he lived.
The plaster figures remind us that history is not written only by emperors or generals. It is written in the quiet gestures, a mother shielding her child, a man refusing to let go of the woman he once loved. Perhaps that is why Pompeii moves us so deeply, because in its stillness we see ourselves, our fears, our hopes, our bonds, our fragility. And though nearly 2,000 years have passed, Pompeii whispers the same truth, that what makes us human is not how long we live, but how we choose to live. So tonight, as you let this story rest in your thoughts, remember Lucius and Valeria, not as perfect lovers, nor as heroes, but as two souls who remind us that even in the face of death, love can leave an eternal mark. And perhaps that is the real gift Pompeii left us, not ruins, not tragedy, but a memory of how fragile and how beautiful it is simply to live.